Have you ever stood in the home you bought with your own sweat, only to hear your parents announce they are moving in within 24 hours? Do not cry. To a manipulator, anger is weakness. When my parents sold everything to turn my sanctuary into their lifeboat, I left my doors wide open. I rolled out the red carpet for the exact guests they never wanted to face. Grab a drink. You will not want to miss this. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now let's begin the story. My name is Bella Mason. I am 32 years old, and for the past 8 years, my life has been a relentless storm of other people's making. As a senior crisis management specialist at Silver Peak Crisis Management, my entire career was built on burying the catastrophic mistakes of the wealthy and powerful. If a politician had a scandalous affair, I spun the narrative. If a tech executive embezzled company funds, I engineered the perfect public apology tour. I spent nearly a decade suffocating under the weight of ironclad non-disclosure agreements, ringing phones at 3 a.m, and the bitter taste of stale office coffee. I was utterly burned out, hollowed out by a corporate world where no one ever took real responsibility for their own messes. So I walked away from it all. I took every single cent of my life savings and bought my ultimate salvation. It was a stunning, secluded wooden cabin perched high on the rugged cliffs of Oakhaven Point, Maine. The property was completely isolated, surrounded only by a dense forest of ancient pines and the endless crashing expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. For the very first time in my 32 years on this earth, I found absolute untainted peace. There were no blaring city sirens, no frantic emails from panicked clients, no demanding bosses. There was only the rhythmic, soothing sound of the ocean waves smashing against the granite rocks below and the crisp, salty coastal breeze sweeping through my open windows. This place was my sanctuary. I had bought it with my own blood, sweat, and countless tears. As I stood on the wraparound wooden deck that first evening, watching a brilliant orange and deep purple sunset slowly bleed across the horizon, I finally felt like my chest could expand. I could breathe. I closed my eyes, letting the cool evening wind brush against my face, truly believing that the toxic chaos of my past was finally behind me forever. Then the phone rang. The shrill sound shattered the tranquility of the evening. I opened my eyes and glanced at the glowing screen in my hand. The caller identification flashed a name that made my stomach instantly drop into a cold, heavy knot. It was Eleanor, my mother. I hesitated for a few long seconds before swiping to answer. I expected a generic greeting, perhaps a forced inquiry about the coastal weather, or a passive-aggressive remark regarding my sudden career change. I did not get any of that. There was no warm hello, no polite checking in. Her voice came through the tiny speaker, sharp, clinical, and completely devoid of any maternal warmth. "Your father and I sold the house," she announced. It was not a conversation starter. It was a cold decree. Before my brain could even begin to process the sheer absurdity of her statement, she delivered the killing blow. "Tomorrow morning, we and your brother Marcus are bringing our things to your place. Do not make this complicated." The raw audacity of her words hit me like a physical strike right to the chest. They had made a life-altering decision involving my private property without a single word of prior discussion, without even a shred of permission. My sanctuary. The dream home I had sacrificed everything to acquire just days ago was being casually seized. A normal person might have screamed into the receiver. A normal daughter might have broken down crying, begging for an explanation, or launching into a furious emotional tirade. But I was not a normal daughter anymore. I was a professional crisis manager. When a massive disaster strikes, you do not panic. You gather intelligence. The professional instinct I had rigorously honed over 8 brutal years instantly took over my nervous system. My racing pulse steadied. My breathing slowed to a calm, measured rhythm. I clamped my mouth shut, wrapping myself in complete calculated silence to let her fill the awkward void, waiting for her to reveal the underlying truth of this ambush. My silence must have unnerved her, but Eleanor was nothing if not entirely predictable. Finding no resistance to push against, she resorted to her favorite weapon, the heavy guilt trip she had used to manipulate me since I was a little girl. Family has to look out for each other, she added, her tone dripping with toxic, unearned entitlement. If you do not like it, you can move somewhere else. The line went dead with a sharp click. She hung up before I could utter a single syllable, fully assuming she had won. Assuming I would simply roll over and accept my miserable fate, just like I always had in the past. I stood alone on the wooden deck, listening to the hollow dial tone, staring out at the darkening, violent ocean. The gentle peace of Oakhaven Point was gone, instantly replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. She thought she was moving into my safe haven. She had absolutely no idea she was stepping onto a meticulously rigged battlefield. The dial tone echoed in the quiet space of my living room. I did not hurl the phone into the dark ocean below. I did not collapse onto the wooden deck in a fit of despair or scream into the salty night air. In my line of work, a visceral emotional reaction is exactly what the opposition counts on. It is the quickest and most certain way to lose control of the narrative. I turned my back to the darkening horizon, slid the heavy glass door shut, and walked straight to my kitchen island. I flipped open my laptop, the screen illuminating the dark room with a harsh blue glow. The crisis management mode in my brain, a mental switch I thought I had permanently disabled just days prior, flicked back on with a terrifying cold intensity. Sudden dramatic decisions in any family dynamic are rarely born from genuine affection or spontaneous desire. They are almost always carefully constructed smokescreens designed to hide a raging fire. I needed to find the fire, and in my industry, information is the only ammunition that matters. I started with the most obvious and glaring lie. Eleanor claimed they had simply sold the family house. People who comfortably and profitably sell their homes do not dictate moving plans with less than 24 hours of notice. I bypassed the usual social media channels and went straight into the state public property databases. I entered their old address into the county assessor's portal. It took exactly 3 minutes to locate the updated deed history. The property had not been sold in a lucrative planned market deal. It had been officially foreclosed upon by the bank precisely 32 days ago. My mother had not brokered a brilliant real estate sale. She had been served an eviction notice by the local sheriff. They were completely broke, flushed out of their own neighborhood, and desperate for a place to land. But the math still did not add up. My parents were not extravagant spenders. They had a robust retirement fund built over 40 years of steady, reliable employment. A paid-off house does not just fall into foreclosure without a catastrophic financial sinkhole. I needed the missing link, and deep down, I knew exactly who it was. Marcus. My younger brother had been the undisputed golden child since the day he was born, incapable of doing wrong in my parents' eyes, even as he stumbled recklessly from one failed venture to the next. I shifted my digital audit toward public court dockets and credit filings. Marcus always left a digital footprint as messy and arrogant as his actual life. It did not take long to uncover the devastating truth. He had taken out massive high-interest personal loans to funnel into a fraudulent cryptocurrency scheme. He had lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in a matter of weeks. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together, forming a repulsive picture. Eleanor and my father had completely drained every single cent of their life savings and retirement accounts in a futile attempt to bail their precious son out of his self-inflicted ruin. They had sacrificed their entire future for him, lost their home, and were now targeting my freshly purchased real estate as their complimentary indefinite lifeboat. The sheer parasitic nature of their plan made my blood run cold, but I needed to know the exact narrative Eleanor was spinning to the rest of the world. A manipulator never moves in silence. They always build an audience to validate their victimhood or their false generosity. I logged into an old, Anonymous social media account I kept purely for monitoring client reputation, and navigated to the extended family's private group page. There it was posted just 2 hours ago by Eleanor herself. The post was accompanied by a stolen picture of my cabin taken straight from the real estate listing. Our sweet daughter pleaded with us to come stay with her, the post read. She begged us to let her repay all the sacrifices we made raising her. We simply could not say no to her tearful request. I stared at the glowing screen, my jaw tight. The audacity was genuinely breathtaking. She was preemptively painting me as the needy dependent child, ensuring that if I ever tried to kick them out, I would be branded an ungrateful monster by every aunt, uncle, and cousin we had. As I scrolled further down the family page, a boastful comment from Marcus caught my eye, and the true, horrifying reality of their invasion finally materialized. He had posted a photograph of a colossal, heavily used recreational vehicle. "Road trip ready? The new mobile mansion," his caption read. A cold realization washed over me. I cross-referenced the vehicle registration database with his name. He had just registered a 40-foot, 10-ton motorhome. They were not planning to sleep quietly in my guest rooms. They had taken whatever pathetic remnants of cash they had left, bought a rolling monstrosity, and fully intended to park it permanently right on my pristine oceanfront grass. They were going to turn the cliffs of Oakhaven Point into their own personal rent-free trailer park, leeching off my electricity, draining my water supply, and destroying my hard-earned peace. They thought I was their easy mark. They were dead wrong. The glow of the laptop screen cast long, distorted shadows across the granite surface of my kitchen island. The rhythmic crashing of the ocean outside, which had felt so deeply therapeutic just an hour ago, now sounded like a heavy, steady warning drum. My mind, trained for nearly a decade to dissect corporate scandals and financial frauds, began to automatically construct a psychological profile of the enemy. A 40-foot motorhome is not a casual purchase. It requires expensive insurance, heavy maintenance gallons of diesel fuel, and costly utility hookups. If my parents had truly lost their home to a bank foreclosure, and if Marcus had entirely liquidated their life savings in a fraudulent digital currency market, they were fundamentally broke. So how did they plan to finance their indefinite camping trip on my front lawn? In the crisis management industry, when the narrative does not match the reality, you always follow the money. I opened a new secure browsing tab and navigated directly to the most popular, globally recognized vacation rental website on the internet. My initial instinct was simply to check the average nightly rates for premium properties in Oakhaven Point. I wanted to calculate exactly how much theoretical rent they were saving by violently squatting on my private land. I slowly typed my new zip code into the search bar and pressed the enter key. The webpage populated a digital map of the rugged coastline, dotted with dozens of little price tags indicating available properties. I zoomed in on the familiar jagged shape of the coastal highway that led up to my isolated cliff. There, sitting precisely on the exact GPS coordinates of my private sanctuary, was a bright red marker. It indicated an active, highly rated listing. My breath caught sharply in the back of my throat. My fingers suddenly felt numb as I moved the cursor and clicked the red icon. A high-resolution photograph instantly filled my entire screen. It was my house. It was the exact custom-built front porch where I had just been standing, bathed in the soft morning sunlight of a photograph clearly taken by my real estate agent only a few short weeks ago. The title of the listing screamed in bold letters, "Luxury Cliffside Retreat, with private beach access." I frantically scrolled down to the host profile section. Staring back at me from a circular profile picture was the smug, arrogant, perfectly curated smile of my younger brother Marcus. The nightly rate was prominently displayed at $850 a night. I felt a violent, visceral wave of nausea wash over my entire body as I read through the property details. He had shamelessly copied and pasted the poetic, evocative descriptions written by my broker, touting the absolute privacy and the serene, untouched nature of the property. I clicked on the booking availability calendar. My blood turned to absolute ice. Every single weekend for the entire months of June, July, and August was completely blocked out in solid, unyielding red. He was not merely planning to list my home in the future, he had already actively accepted bookings. He had been aggressively collecting massive, non-refundable deposits from unsuspecting vacationers and families across the country. He was using my physical address, my hard-earned sanctuary, to generate a massive fraudulent stream of illicit income. Suddenly, the entire sickening architecture of their master plan snapped into horrifyingly perfect focus. It was a strategy so unimaginably brazen, so meticulously parasitic that it almost defied human belief. They were never going to sleep quietly in my spare guest rooms. They were going to park that monstrous 10-ton recreational vehicle directly on my pristine, expensive landscaping. They planned to aggressively hook their waste hoses into my private septic system and splice their thick power cables into my electrical grid. From the cozy, rent-free comfort of their mobile mansion, they fully intended to run a highly lucrative, illegal hotel business using the very cabin I had just drained my life savings to purchase. And what exactly was my intended role in this grand twisted scheme? The malicious math was incredibly simple. They would either relentlessly bully, harass, and guilt-trip me until my spirit broke and I fled my own home, or far worse, they would brutally force me to stay. They would demand that I act as the unpaid live-in maid and concierge for their endless rotating cast of entitled summer tourists. Every single dollar wrung from the floors and walls of my property would be funneled directly into the dark, bottomless black hole of Marcus's insurmountable financial debts. But the horror of their betrayal did not stop there. A scam of this massive magnitude requires initial seed money, and Marcus was entirely bankrupt. Where did he miraculously get the funds to purchase that enormous rolling monstrosity in the first place? I dove straight back into the digital shadows. I bypassed the public family social media pages and started aggressively digging into the specific comment threads and shared links of my older, wealthier relatives. I found exactly what I was looking for buried under a seemingly innocent status update by my Aunt Linda. Eleanor had been engaging in a highly targeted, intensely private messaging campaign. I managed to uncover a forwarded electronic mail chain my mother had sent to 3 of my wealthiest aunts and uncles. In the body of the message, Eleanor spun a masterful, utterly devastating lie. She claimed that my purchase of the isolated Oakhaven Point property was actually a strategic joint family investment. She brazenly assured her siblings that I had explicitly and happily agreed to use the deed to my new cabin as ironclad financial collateral. This imaginary collateral was being used to officially back a brand new, highly lucrative, risk-free business venture spearheaded entirely by Marcus. She was actively and aggressively soliciting tens of thousands of dollars in fresh cash investments from our own flesh and blood relatives, promising them massive guaranteed financial returns, backed by the equity of a house they falsely believed Marcus had a legal stake in. Bella is entirely on board. Her message read the digital words practically radiating a toxic manipulative warmth. She desperately wants to see her brother thrive, and she knows this real estate-backed project is a completely foolproof opportunity for all of us to aggressively grow our family wealth together. I sat completely frozen in the dim blue light of my kitchen. The sheer staggering scale of the deception was suffocating. This was not a desperate, loving family seeking temporary shelter during a rough economic patch. This was not a misguided but well-intentioned attempt at familial bonding. It was a highly organized, deeply malicious property heist. It had been carefully architected by my mother and ruthlessly executed by my brother, all sickeningly sugar-coated with the sacred, untouchable language of family love and unity. They had weaponized my financial independence against me. They had taken the one pure, beautiful thing I had managed to build after 8 years of grueling corporate warfare and turned it into a slaughterhouse for their own financial crimes. The profound healing peace I had felt just a few short hours ago was completely obliterated. In its place, a cold, calculating, and incredibly dangerous metallic rage began to settle deep into my bones. They genuinely thought they had backed me into a dark corner. They foolishly believed that the heavy invisible chains of toxic family obligation would keep me perfectly silent and compliant, while they systematically bled me dry. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I did not pick up the phone to scream at Eleanor. I did not text Marcus to demand a frantic explanation or threaten him with legal action. In my profession, warning your target is the ultimate unforgivable amateur mistake. You never announce the impending scandal to the perpetrators. You let them confidently walk right into the bright lights of the press conference entirely blind. I needed to systematically and ruthlessly sever every single avenue of escape they had meticulously planned. I started with their audience. A con artist's greatest vulnerability is the very people they are desperately trying to con the people whose trust they have already monetized. I pulled up my phone's contact list and dialed Aunt Linda first. She was Eleanor's oldest sister, the wealthiest of the lot, and historically the easiest to manipulate. She answered on the second ring, her voice bubbling with a manufactured, eager warmth that instantly set my teeth on edge. I matched her tone perfectly effortlessly, slipping into my corporate persona, injecting just the right amount of breathless, grateful excitement into my voice. "Aunt Linda, I am so glad you are awake," I said, leaning against the cold granite of my kitchen island. "I am organizing a surprise welcome gathering for my parents tomorrow at my new house. More importantly, Marcus has some incredibly exciting, highly confidential updates regarding his new business venture. And he specifically wants all the primary investors present for the big reveal. Can you Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan be at my property at exactly 12 o'clock noon?" She agreed instantly, practically vibrating through the phone speaker with the anticipation of guaranteed, effortless wealth. She even offered to bring a celebratory bottle of expensive champagne. I repeated the exact same flawless performance 2 more times with my other uncles, successfully securing the mandatory attendance of every single relative whose bank accounts had been quietly bled dry by my brother's phantom cryptocurrency scheme. The very important person's audience for tomorrow's public execution was officially booked and confirmed. With the unsuspecting spectators arranged, I needed to secure the heavy, undeniable artillery of the local government. Oakhaven Point was a wealthy, fiercely protected, fiercely private coastal enclave. The local municipal government absolutely despised loud noises, cheap tourist traps, and above all else, severe zoning violations on their pristine coastline. I navigated to the town hall directory on my laptop and bypassed the standard complaint forms, finding the direct emergency dispatch number for the local zoning enforcement officer, which routed directly through the county sheriff's department after hours. It was late, but small-town dispatchers working the night shift always answer the radio. I identified myself as the legal owner of the new cliffside property and spoke with the clipped, urgent, and highly professional cadence of a deeply concerned, tax-paying citizen who was terrified of an impending ecological disaster. "I need to report a severe impending violation of the coastal residential zoning ordinances," I stated clearly and firmly to the board officer on the line. "I have credible, heavily documented information that a massive 40-foot commercial recreational vehicle intends to brutally trespass and illegally set up a permanent commercial campsite on my private environmentally protected oceanfront acreage tomorrow afternoon. They are planning to dump raw hazardous waste into the protected soil and illegally bypass municipal electrical utility codes." The dispatcher's tone immediately shifted from a sleepy drawl to sharp, focused attention. Coastal preservation was not just a policy in this town. It was practically a violent religion. I provided the police with the exact make, model, year, and license plate number of the mobile monstrosity Marcus had just registered in his name. I aggressively assured the dispatcher that I would be pressing full unyielding maximum criminal trespass charges the absolute second those massive dirty tires crushed a single blade of my coastal grass. The sheriff promised to have a heavy patrol unit idling discreetly near the hidden highway turnoff by late morning waiting for my signal. The legal trap was perfectly set, but I still needed a physical cage. A cornered, desperate animal will always instinctively try to run away, and I could not allow my family that luxurious option. I searched the internet for a premium 24-hour emergency security contractor servicing the greater county area. Money was absolutely no longer an object. Ruthless mechanical precision was the only currency I cared about tonight. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, a heavy, unmarked utility van rolled quietly up my long, winding gravel driveway. I walked out into the freezing night air and paid the lead technician triple his usual exorbitant hourly rate, handing him a thick stack of crisp, cold cash to completely rewrite the core operating software of my heavy wrought iron security gates. I explicitly told him I did not want the gates locked to keep malicious people out. I wanted a roach motel. The confused but well-compensated technician bypassed the standard two-way sensor grid, meticulously reprogramming the heavy hydraulic mechanical arms to swing wide open upon detecting any large approaching vehicle from the main public road. However, once those massive iron gates clicked shut behind the enormous chassis of that incoming motorhome, the outward-facing motion sensors were rendered completely dead and unresponsive. The absolute only possible way to force the heavy iron doors back open from the inside was to manually scan a unique randomized 16-digit barcode that I generated on my personal mobile phone and held in my absolute exclusive possession. They could roll their stolen rolling palace right into my driveway with ease, but they would not be able to turn that massive rig around and flee when the legal hellfire finally rained down upon them. They were going to be permanently locked inside the bloody arena with me. The final crucial phase of my midnight preparation required physical, undeniable, devastating proof. Spoken words can always be twisted and manipulated by a master narcissist like Eleanor, but black printer ink and official state government seals cannot be argued with. I powered up my heavy-duty office laser printer and spent the next 2 solid hours generating a thick, heavy stack of immaculate, undeniable documentation. First, I printed the pristine notarized property deed explicitly proving my absolute sole and independent ownership of the Oakhaven Point cabin, completely free of any fabricated familial liens, shared equity, or ridiculous collateral agreements. Second, I printed the tragic, humiliating bank foreclosure notice, bearing Eleanor and my father's full legal names, highlighting in bright yellow marker the exact date they were legally and forcefully thrown out onto the street by their creditors. Finally, the absolute masterpiece of my devastating collection, the illicit fraudulent vacation rental listings. I printed every single web page, every stolen glossy photograph of my living room, and every confirmed digital banking receipt showing the thousands of dollars in non-refundable deposits Marcus had already illegally pocketed from out-of-state strangers. I organized the explosive, life-ruining documents into a sleek professional black leather portfolio, snapping the heavy magnetic clasp shut with a satisfying, sharp, echoing click. The sun was just beginning to break over the violent, crashing waves of the deep Atlantic Ocean, casting a pale, cold, grayish-blue light across my polished hardwood floors. My exhaustive work was entirely finished. The psychological battlefield was pristine, the physical exits were heavily barricaded, and the legal artillery was fully loaded and primed. I walked slowly over to the kitchen stove, put the heavy cast iron kettle on the glowing burner, and carefully brewed a steaming, fragrant pot of golden chamomile tea. I carried the delicate porcelain cup out onto the sprawling wooden deck, my bare feet quiet against the freezing timber. The salty morning air was aggressively biting and wonderfully, shockingly sharp. I sat down heavily in my thick cedar lounge chair, wrapped my freezing, trembling fingers tightly around the warm ceramic mug, and smiled softly into the roaring, deafening ocean wind. I took a slow, deliberate, incredibly satisfying sip of the hot tea, savoring the absolute perfect, undisturbed silence of my property eagerly and patiently, counting down the remaining hours until the heavy velvet curtains finally rose on the greatest, most devastating crisis management operation of my entire hard-fought life. The morning sun climbed higher into the cloudless Maine sky, baking the dew off my cedar deck. At exactly 45 minutes past 11 o'clock, the sensor on my driveway chime echoed softly through the quiet house. I stood by the expansive glass doors and watched as a sleek silver luxury sedan glided up the long incline, safely passing the reprogrammed iron gates. Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert stepped out looking wildly out of place in their country club attire against the rugged, untamed backdrop of Oakhaven Point. Linda was practically vibrating with excitement, clutching a cold, sweating bottle of expensive French champagne against her chest. 10 minutes later, Uncle Jim and Aunt Susan arrived in their pristine black sport utility vehicle, carrying a massive, overly decorated gift basket. I walked out to greet them wearing a perfectly tailored neutral cashmere sweater and a warm, practiced smile. I played the role of the gracious, accommodating niece to absolute perfection. I ushered them onto the sprawling wraparound porch, offering them crystal glasses and completely ignoring the heavy, sickening irony of their presence. They did not compliment the architecture or the breathtaking ocean view. Instead, they immediately began whispering about the massive financial returns Marcus had promised them. Aunt Linda leaned in closely, patting my arm, praising me for being such a supportive sister, and for allowing my spectacular new property to be used as the central hub for their brilliant new family enterprise. I simply nodded, maintaining unbroken eye contact, and told them that all their burning questions about their financial investments would be answered very shortly. The antique grandfather clock in my hallway struck exactly 12 o'clock noon. Before the final chime could even fade into the salty air, a horrific mechanical roar shattered the serene tranquility of the coastline. It sounded like an angry industrial freight train struggling to climb the steep, winding coastal road. My relatives stopped chatting, their champagne glasses frozen in midair, as they turned to look down the long driveway. The heavy wrought iron security gates smoothly swung outward, functioning exactly as I had paid the technician to program them. What came lumbering through the stone pillars was a nightmare composed of fiberglass and peeling vinyl decals. It was a monstrous 40-foot recreational vehicle, belching a thick black cloud of toxic diesel exhaust into my pristine ocean air. Trailing closely behind the hulking beast was a battered, rented box truck, undoubtedly packed with whatever pathetic remnants of furniture my parents had managed to salvage from their bank foreclosure. I watched with a cold, clinical satisfaction as the box truck cleared the threshold. The moment its rear bumper passed the invisible sensor line, the heavy iron gates glided shut. A loud, definitive metallic clank echoed across the property as the deadbolts engaged. They were completely locked in. The massive recreational vehicle aggressively crunched over the decorative white gravel, moving with a reckless, violent speed. The passenger door violently swung open before the vehicle had even come to a complete halt. Eleanor stepped out onto my driveway. She did not look at the breathtaking view of the Atlantic Ocean. She did not look at the stunning architecture of the cabin I had sacrificed 8 years of my life to buy. She immediately positioned herself like a battlefield commander, waving her arms frantically, shouting loud, aggressive instructions over the deafening roar of the diesel engine. She was forcefully directing Marcus to reverse the 10-ton behemoth directly off the gravel driveway and straight onto the lush, imported coastal grass I had painstakingly paid to have landscaped just weeks prior. I watched the massive, muddy rear tires violently mount the stone curbing, sinking deep into the soft, expensive turf, tearing massive, ugly brown gashes into the pristine green lawn. Satisfied with the destruction, Eleanor finally turned around, dusting off her hands with a smug, triumphant smirk, ready to march up the stairs and claim her conquered territory. That was the exact moment she looked up and saw the audience. She froze completely solid. Her foot hovered awkwardly over the first wooden step. For 2 glorious, uninterrupted seconds, I watched her carefully constructed mask slip, revealing a flash of absolute, unadulterated panic. She saw Linda, Robert, Jim, and Susan standing on the elevated porch, staring down at her with a mixture of profound confusion and polite curiosity. Eleanor was a master manipulator, but even she had not prepared a script for her wealthy investors witnessing her arrive in a rolling, exhaust-spewing shantytown. However, the instinct of a seasoned narcissist is incredibly fast. The panic vanished instantly, replaced by a loud theatrical gasp of manufactured joy. She threw her arms open, her face breaking into a massive plastic smile that did not reach her cold eyes. "Oh my goodness!" Eleanor screamed over the idling engine, practically skipping up the stairs. "Bella, what a wonderful surprise. You invited everyone to celebrate our family's new home. Linda, Jim, it is so wonderful to see you all here to welcome us." Before anyone could respond to her bizarre possessive phrasing, the driver's side door of the recreational vehicle forcefully slammed open. Marcus strutted out, looking like the arrogant, untouchable king of the world. He was wearing expensive designer sunglasses he absolutely could not afford, and a smug, self-satisfied grin. He completely ignored the aunts and uncles standing just a few feet away. He marched to the lower storage compartments, yanked out two massive heavy suitcases, and arrogantly hauled them toward the front door. He stopped at the bottom of the porch stairs, finally looking up at me. He did not say hello. He did not say thank you. "Good, you are already outside," Marcus ordered, his voice dripping with unbearable, unearned authority. "Take these bags inside. And clear your junk out of the master suite. I am taking the room with the ocean view. You can move your things down into the basement." A stunned, heavy silence instantly fell over the entire wraparound porch. My aunts and uncles exchanged deeply bewildered glances. Linda lowered her champagne glass, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. This was not the behavior of a brilliant, wealthy entrepreneur moving into a joint investment property. This was the behavior of a spoiled, desperate squatter giving orders to the rightful owner. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I calmly reached down and picked up the thick black leather portfolio resting perfectly in the center of the outdoor glass table. I took 2 slow, deliberate steps forward, positioning myself at the absolute edge of the porch, looking directly down at the 2 trespassers who had just unknowingly locked themselves inside my customized trap. "Welcome to my private property," I said. My voice was incredibly smooth quiet, but it carried a sharp, echoing resonance that sliced cleanly through the lingering noise of the diesel engine. I looked straight into my brother's hidden eyes, then shifted my gaze to my mother's suddenly pale face. "Mom, Marcus, do you two want to explain the vacation rental business to the aunts and uncles, or should I?" The heavy silence that followed my question was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus froze, his hand still gripping the plastic handle of his heavy suitcase. The arrogant smirk completely evaporated from his face, replaced by a twitching, nervous confusion. Eleanor's jaw dropped. She looked wildly from my cold, unblinking eyes to the highly confused faces of the aunts and uncles standing on the deck. I did not give them a single second to formulate a new lie. I reached into the black leather portfolio and forcefully pulled out the thick stack of printed documents. I threw them down onto the heavy glass patio table. The sharp, violent smack of the paper hitting the glass made everyone flinch. "Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert," I said, my voice echoing loudly across the coastal wind. I pointed a steady finger directly at Marcus. "My brother does not have a brilliant new business venture. He has a massive, highly illegal fraud operation, and you are currently standing on the crime scene." Linda hesitantly stepped forward and picked up the first few pages. Her eyes scanned the high-resolution prints of the vacation rental website. She saw the bright photographs of my living room, the advertised rate of $850 a night, and the calendar entirely blocked out for the next 3 months. "I bought this house entirely by myself." I continued, speaking clearly and deliberately, so every single word landed like a physical blow. "My name is the only name on the deed." Marcus took my address, created a fake listing, and has been aggressively stealing thousands of dollars in non-refundable vacation deposits from innocent families all across the country. He planned to park that disgusting, leaking recreational vehicle on my front lawn and force me to run his illegal hotel. "What are you talking about?" Uncle Jim demanded, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He snatched the next packet of papers from the table. "Eleanor told us you put this property up as collateral for the family investment fund. She said the bank backed Marcus 100%. "There is no investment fund, Uncle Jim," I replied, staring fiercely at my mother, who was now visibly trembling, her face drained of all color. "Look at the next document. It is a certified county notice. They did not sell their home for a profit. The bank foreclosed on them exactly 32 days ago. They were officially evicted by the county sheriff. Gasps erupted across the porch. Aunt Susan covered her mouth in absolute horror as Jim read the foreclosure notice aloud. I turned my gaze back to my brother, who was physically backing away toward the heavy iron gates, looking desperately for an exit he would never find. Marcus took out hundreds of thousands of dollars in high-interest personal loans, I announced to the shocked crowd. He dumped every single penny into a digital currency scam and lost it all. My parents drained their entire retirement fund to pay off his criminal debts, lost their house, and then they lied to all of you to steal your hard-earned savings just to buy that 10-ton piece of garbage parked on my grass. The absolute reality of the situation crashed down upon the relatives. Their promised wealth, their secure retirement investments, had entirely vanished into my brother's insurmountable mountain of debt. Uncle Robert lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the collar of his expensive designer shirt, screaming furiously into his face, demanding his money back. Sensing that her carefully constructed web of lies had been completely annihilated, Eleanor resorted to her ultimate desperate weapon. She threw her hands into the air and let out a blood-curdling theatrical shriek. She fell to her knees right there on the crushed white gravel, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "You are a monster!" Eleanor screamed at me, forcing massive fake tears down her cheeks. "You are a cold-blooded, hateful monster. We gave you life. We raised you, and you stand there trying to destroy your own flesh and blood. You want to see your own family homeless on the streets." She looked up desperately, trying to catch the sympathetic eyes of her sisters, trying to pull them back into her toxic orbit. But the aunts and uncles were not looking at her with pity. They were looking at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. When a manipulator messes with a person's emotions, they might be forgiven. But when they steal a person's life savings, the illusion of family loyalty instantly dies. Right at the absolute peak of Eleanor's screaming tantrum, a loud, piercing siren wailed from the main road. Flashing red and blue lights bounced off the dense pine trees. I pulled out my mobile phone, opened my security application, and pressed the master override button. The heavy wrought iron gate smoothly swung open. A local county sheriff cruiser slowly rolled onto the property, its tires crunching loudly over the gravel. But it was the vehicle following directly behind the police car that made Eleanor's screaming instantly stop. It was a massive, heavy-duty commercial wrecker truck. Its enormous diesel engine roared as it pulled into the driveway, bright yellow warning lights spinning rapidly on its roof. Two uniformed officers stepped out of the cruiser. The lead sheriff adjusted his utility belt and looked in absolute disgust at the massive motorhome parked illegally on my delicate coastal grass. "Who is the registered owner of this commercial vehicle?" the sheriff demanded, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. Marcus was too paralyzed by fear to speak. He just weakly raised his shaking hand. "You are in severe violation of municipal coastal zoning ordinances," the sheriff stated, pulling a thick citation pad from his pocket. "You are illegally trespassing on protected private property, causing environmental damage to coastal soil, and operating an unlicensed commercial campsite. The immediate municipal penalty is a $5,000 fine payable right here, right now. If you cannot pay, this vehicle will be immediately impounded and towed at your expense." Marcus patted his empty pockets in a sheer pathetic panic. He looked at my parents. "Mom, Dad, give me your credit cards. Do something." My father, who had been standing in cowardly silence the entire time, just shook his head, looking down at his shoes. They had completely emptied their bank accounts just to put fuel in the tank. They did not have a single cent to their names. "We do not have the money," Eleanor cried, abandoning her fake tears for genuine terrifying panic. She scrambled to her feet and ran toward the officers. "Please, you cannot take it. Everything we own is inside that vehicle. Our clothes, our pictures, our whole lives." The sheriff was completely unmoved. He had dealt with entitled lawbreakers in this wealthy town for decades. He simply nodded to the tow truck operator. "Hook it up." The metallic clanking of heavy steel chains and the loud hiss of pneumatic brakes filled the air. My parents and Marcus stood frozen in absolute impotence as the operator expertly backed the massive wrecker toward the motorhome. Within 2 minutes, heavy steel cables were secured underneath the front chassis. The powerful hydraulic winch groaned loudly, lifting the front wheels of their rolling mansion high off the ground. The relatives swarmed Marcus, shoving him screaming threats of immediate civil lawsuits and demanding he be arrested for fraud. The chaos was deafening, a beautiful, destructive symphony of consequences. Eleanor turned around and looked up at me. Her eyes were wide, desperate, and filled with a sudden, humiliating realization that I held all the power. "Bella, please," she begged, her voice cracking, completely devoid of her usual arrogance. "Please pay the fine. You have the money. We are your family. You cannot just leave us with nothing." I stood perfectly still on the edge of my cedar deck. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life suffocating me with guilt. I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, incredible weight lifting off my shoulders. I smiled a sharp, cold, completely victorious smile. "If you do not like how I welcome guests, you can move somewhere else," I said, repeating the exact words she had used to dismiss me the night before. I paused, letting the cold reality wash over her entirely. "Oh wait, you do not have anywhere else to go." I turned my back on them. I did not look back as the massive tow truck began pulling their entire stolen life down the driveway. I did not look back as my parents frantically ran down the gravel road, hopelessly chasing after the flashing yellow lights. I did not look back as my furious relatives dragged a sobbing Marcus toward their cars to drag him straight to the police station. I walked through the sliding glass door and stepped into the quiet, peaceful warmth of my beautiful cabin. I closed the heavy glass door, pulled the steel lock into place with a definitive click, and shut them out of my life forever. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Vivian Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.